In May 2021, Americans lined up for gas with containers, bags, and buckets as the largest fuel pipeline in the country went dark. The culprit wasn't a natural disaster or a mechanical failure, it was lines of code. This isn't just a story about a cyber attack. It's about how a single compromised password led to the empty gas stations across the East Coast, emergency government declarations, and a $4.4 million Bitcoin ransom. The Colonial Pipeline attack exposed America's digital vulnerabilities like never before. In this video, we'll trace the DarkSide ransomware group's methodical attack on the Colonial Pipeline, examine the immediate nationwide impact, and explore the critical lessons learned from an incident that transformed cybersecurity policy forever. Chapter 1. The Target. Colonial Pipeline isn't just any company. It's the jugular vein of America's East Coast fuel supply. Stretching 5,500 miles from Houston, Texas to the New York Harbor, this massive pipeline system carries 2.5 million barrels daily. Gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, and home heating oil, representing 45% of all fuel consumed on the East Coast. From Air Force One to family minivans, Colonial's pipeline keeps America moving. What makes Colonial particularly critical is its irreplaceability. While other fuel transport methods exist, rail, trucks, ships, none could rapidly replace Colonial's capacity. Each day the pipeline remained offline meant that approximately 100 million gallons of fuel was not reaching their destinations. The pipeline's path crosses 13 states and supplies over 50 million Americans, making it one of the most essential pieces of energy infrastructure in the country. Despite its critical importance, Colonial Pipeline's security posture reflected a troubling reality in America's infrastructure: sophisticated physical security paired with inadequate digital protection. While the company had implemented robust measures to prevent physical attacks on their facilities, their cyber defenses relied largely on voluntary guidelines from the Transport Security Administration, or the TSA. Most shocking was the regulatory gap that existed before the attack. The TSA, responsible for the pipeline security, had only 6 full-time employees overseeing approximately 2.7 million miles of pipeline across the country. The agency's guidelines for cybersecurity were entirely voluntary, with no enforcement power. Colonial, like many infrastructure companies, operated in a cybersecurity environment based on trust rather than verification. Colonial's network architecture reflected common practices among industrial operators: a separation between information technology networks handling business operations and operational technology systems directly controlling the pipeline. This separation was intended as a security measure, ensuring that problems in the business network couldn't affect physical operations. However, the digital transformation of industrial systems has created increasing connections between these once isolated networks. Billing systems need operational data. Maintenance systems require access to both networks. These interconnections, while efficient for business operations, created potential pathways between systems that were supposed to remain separated. For threat actors looking for high-value targets, Colonial Pipeline represented a perfect storm: critical national importance, regulatory gaps, and a network complexity that created exploitable seams. Chapter 2. The Attackers. The group behind the Colonial Pipeline attack called themselves DarkSide, a new but sophisticated ransomware operation that first appeared in August 2020. In less than a year, they had already amassed an impressive list of victims across multiple industries. What made DarkSide different from common cybercriminals was their professionalism and business model. Operating from Eastern Europe, likely Russia, DarkSide presented itself as a criminal enterprise with business ethics. They maintained a sleek, dark site where they posted stolen data, issued press releases, and even claimed to make charitable donations from their criminal proceeds. Most significantly, they operated as a ransomware as a service, essentially franchising their malicious software to affiliates who would conduct attacks and split the profits with the DarkSide developers. DarkSide represented the evolution of ransomware, from crude scattershot attacks to sophisticated targeted operations against high-value victims. They pioneered what experts call quadruple extortion: 4 layers of pressure on victims, encrypting data, stealing sensitive information before encryption, threatening to leak that data publicly, and conducting denial of service attacks against the victim's public websites. Their code of conduct was equally significant: They publicly claimed to avoid targeting hospitals, schools, nonprofits, and government entities. This wasn't from altruism, but strategic calculation. Attacking these sectors might prompt a more severe government response. As DarkSide themselves wrote on their website, "Our goal is to make money and not create problems for society." This calculated approach allowed them to operate for months without triggering the full force of the international law enforcement. DarkSide's technical sophistication set them apart from amateur groups. Their malware contained advanced features. It checked system language settings to avoid infecting Russian computers. It utilized sophisticated encryption algorithms that were practically unbreakable. It could propagate through networks using legitimate administrative tools, and it could identify and destroy backup systems before announcing its presence. Perhaps most impressively, the malware could operate in safe mode, able to continue functioning even when the computers were restarted in diagnostic configurations designed to stop malicious software. DarkSide operated like a criminal business startup with professional specialization. The core group focused on developing the ransomware code and infrastructure, while affiliates, hackers who joined their network, would identify and compromise victims. This division of labor created efficiency and scale. The core DarkSide team would receive between 20 and 30% of any ransom payment, with the rest going to the affiliate who conducted the actual attack. By the time they attacked Colonial Pipeline, blockchain analysis would later reveal that DarkSide had collected approximately $90 million in ransom payments, with the core developers pocketing about $15.5 million. What made this business model particularly dangerous was its ability to scale. DarkSide could have dozens of affiliates attacking different targets simultaneously without having to conduct each operation themselves. Chapter 3: The Initial Breach. The attack began with a single compromised password. On April 29, 2021, over a week before the world would learn about the attack, DarkSide affiliates gained access to Colonial Pipeline's networks through an inactive virtual private network account. It wasn't an elaborate zero-day exploit or a sophisticated supply chain attack, it was simply a password that shouldn't have worked anymore. The VPN account belonged to a former employee who had left the company, but the account had never been disabled. Even more critically, while the password was complex enough to meet security requirements, it had been leaked in an unrelated data breach and posted on the dark web. This perfectly illustrates a fundamental cybersecurity principle. Sophisticated attacks often begin with the simplest vulnerabilities. The attacker didn't need to break down Colonial's front door, they found an old key under the mat. What made this breach particularly preventable was the lack of multi-factor authentication on the VPN. Multi-factor authentication requires something you know, mainly a password, and something you have, like a phone, for a verification code. Colonial's VPN system allowed access with just a password. Had MFA been implemented, the compromised password alone would have been useless to the attackers. This single security measure could have potentially prevented the entire incident. Once inside Colonial's network, the attackers didn't immediately deploy ransomware. Instead, they began quietly mapping the network, identifying critical systems, and searching for valuable data. This phase, known as reconnaissance, lasted for over a week. Using legitimate administrative tools to avoid triggering security alerts, they methodically explored Colonial's IT environment, carefully documenting what they found. The attackers discovered a critical vulnerability in Colonial's network architecture. While the operational technology controlling the actual pipeline was segregated from the information technology network they had infiltrated, the billing system bridged both environments. Colonial's billing system required data from the operational side to bill customers accurately. This connection between the supposedly isolated networks would prove pivotal in the decision to shut down the entire pipeline. Before deploying their ransomware, the attackers stole approximately 100 gigabytes of data from Colonial servers in just 2 hours. This data theft served two purposes. It gave them valuable information about Colonial's operations, and more importantly, it provided leverage for their second extortion method, threatening to publicly release sensitive corporate data. The stolen information reportedly included billing information, contract details, and possibly personal data about Colonial's customers and employees. This pre-encryption theft has become standard practice in sophisticated ransomware attacks, creating multiple pressure points to force payment even if victims have good backups of their encrypted data. Chapter 4. The attack unfolds. At 4:30 a.m. on Friday, May 7th, 2021, a Colonial Pipeline employee discovered a ransom note on a computer screen. Within minutes, it became clear this wasn't an isolated incident. The ransomware had spread throughout Colonial's business networks, encrypting critical systems including their billing infrastructure. By 5:30 a.m., company executives were on emergency conference calls with security teams, and a devastating decision was being considered. The note was direct. DarkSide had encrypted Colonial's data and demanded approximately 75 Bitcoin, worth around $4.4 million at the time, for the decryption key. The message also revealed that they had stolen corporate data and would leak it online if the payment wasn't made. Colonial immediately engaged an external cybersecurity firm, Mandiant, to investigate and contacted the FBI. By mid-morning on May 7th, Colonial's leadership faced an unprecedented decision. While the ransomware had not directly affected the operational technology running the pipeline itself, it had crippled the billing systems. Without functioning billing systems, Colonial couldn't track fuel deliveries or bill customers, creating both financial and accountability problems. The interconnection between IT and OT systems created uncertainty whether the infection could spread to operational controls. In what would later be described as an abundance of caution, Colonial made the momentous decision to shut down the entire pipeline, the first time in its 57-year history that the pipeline had been completely taken offline for a cybersecurity incident. This decision would trigger the largest impact on US energy infrastructure ever caused by a cyber attack. As Colonial's network went dark, a multi-agency response mobilized with remarkable speed. The FBI, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, the CISA, Department of Energy, and Department of Homeland Security were all engaged within hours. President Biden was briefed on the situation the same day, signaling the national security implications of the attack. Colonial brought in dozens of external security experts from Mandiant, Microsoft, and other firms to contain the breach, investigate its extent, and begin recovery efforts. Meanwhile, the FBI identified DarkSide as the responsible group and began tracking their digital footprints across the dark web and cryptocurrency exchanges. Colonial Pipeline released its first public statements on the evening of May 7th, confirming a cybersecurity incident and the precautionary shutdown of the pipeline system. The company's carefully worded statement emphasized that it had proactively taken systems offline to contain the threat, but provided few technical details about the attack itself. As news spread of the shutdown, Energy Analysis immediately warned of the potential fuel shortages if the pipeline remained offline for more than a few days. By Saturday morning, May 8th, what had started as a corporate security incident was rapidly evolving into a national emergency with potential impacts on millions of Americans. Chapter 5. America Feels the Impact. The effects of the shutdown spread through the economy like ripples in a pond. By Sunday, May 9th, wholesale gasoline prices began rising. On Monday, as the pipeline remained offline for a third day, gas stations in the southeast started running dry. By Tuesday, more than 10,000 gas stations across the region reported fuel outages. In states like North Carolina, over 65% of the gas stations had no fuel to sell. The aviation sector was hit particularly hard. Charlotte Douglas International Airport in North Carolina, a major hub for American Airlines, faced critical jet fuel shortages, forcing airlines to implement contingency measures, including adding refueling stops for long-haul flights. Military bases across the East Coast activated emergency fuel reserves to maintain readiness. Human psychology quickly amplified the supply disruption. As images of gas stations without a fuel sign started to spread across social media and news outlets, panic buying ensued. Consumers began hoarding gasoline in anything they could find: approved containers, plastic bags, even storage bins, despite warnings about dangerous and illegal storage methods. Long lines formed at stations that still had fuel, with wait times exceeding hours in some locations. Arguments, line cutting, and even physical altercations were reported at gas stations across multiple states. The run on gas created a self-fulfilling prophecy. Fear of shortages created actual shortages, even in areas that wouldn't have been affected by short-term pipeline disruptions. The federal government responded with emergency actions to mitigate the crisis. President Biden issued emergency declarations waiving restrictions on fuel transport by road. The Department of Transportation temporarily lifted regulations limiting the hours that truck drivers could operate to keep fuel deliveries moving. The Environmental Protection Agency issued waivers of gasoline requirements to increase the available supply. These emergency measures demonstrated the severity of the situation. America was effectively rewriting its safety and environmental rules on the fly to keep fuel flowing. The efforts helped, but they couldn't fully replace the capacity of the pipeline. Only restarting Colonial's operations would truly resolve the crisis. Beyond the immediate fuel shortages, the economic impact spread to other sectors. Shipping costs rose as trucking companies faced higher fuel prices and supply uncertainties. Rideshare companies like Uber and Lyft implemented temporary fuel surcharges in affected regions. Airlines rerouted flights and added fuel stops, increasing costs and delays. By the end of the week, average gasoline prices nationwide had risen to $3.04 per gallon, the highest since 2014. In some hard-hit areas of the Southeast, prices jumped over 20 cents per gallon in a single day. The ransomware attack was effectively imposing a tax on every American who needed to drive, fly, or purchase goods transported by fuel. Chapter 6: The Ransom Decision. While Americans lined up for gas, Colonial Pipeline executives faced an agonizing decision whether to pay the ransom. The company had backups of many systems, but restoring those backups would take time, potentially weeks for full restoration. Meanwhile, every day offline cost the company millions in lost revenue and damaged reputation. The FBI's long-standing position has been to discourage ransom payments as they fund criminal enterprises and encourage future attacks. However, the agency doesn't prohibit companies from paying. Colonial's CEO Joseph Blount later revealed that on the evening of May 7th, the same day the attack was discovered, Colonial decided to pay the ransom. The payment of 75 Bitcoin, worth approximately $4.4 million, was transferred to DarkSide's digital wallet within hours of the decision. The cryptocurrency transaction itself reflects the technical sophistication of modern ransomware operations. DarkSide provided Colonial with a dedicated Bitcoin address for the payment, which would be processed through a series of mixing services designed to obscure the money trail. These services split the payment across dozens of wallets before reassembling them in accounts controlled by the attackers. This money laundering technique makes tracing and recovering ransom payments extremely difficult for law enforcement, though not impossible as later events would show. Payment of the ransom did not provide instant relief. After receiving Colonial's Bitcoin transfer, DarkSide provided a decryption tool as promised, but the tool worked painfully slow. Colonial discovered what many ransomware victims learn. Even after paying, recovery is neither quick nor simple. The provided decryptor was so inefficient that Colonial continued restoring many systems from their backups in parallel. This experience highlighted a critical reality of ransomware attacks. Even when victims pay, recovery remains challenging and time-consuming. The decryption process for large enterprise networks can take weeks, during which business operations remain impaired. For Colonial, the combination of the recovery efforts and the decryption tool provided by the attackers allowed them to begin restoring basic operations within days, but full recovery would take much longer. Chapter 7: Recovery and Restart. On May 12th, 5 days after the initial attack, Colonial announced it had begun the process of restarting the pipeline operations. The company emphasized that the restart would be gradual, with each section over the 5,500-mile system requiring careful validation before resuming full operation. The announcement triggered cautious optimism in energy markets, but Colonial warned that it would take several days for the supply chain to return to normal. By May 13th, Colonial reported that all pipeline systems were operational, though not yet at full capacity. Fuel began flowing again to all markets served by the pipeline, but the company cautioned that some markets might continue experiencing intermittent service as the system stabilized. The restart represented a major technical achievement, safely reactivating a massive pipeline network while simultaneously rebuilding compromised IT systems. Throughout the recovery period, Colonial's public communications followed a carefully controlled strategy. The company provided regular updates through press releases and a dedicated incident response website, but shared minimal technical details about the attack or their recovery methods. This approach reflected both security concerns and legal considerations. Revealing too much could help future attackers or affect ongoing investigations. Colonial's communication strategy drew both praise and criticism. Energy sector analysis commended the company's transparency about operational status, which helped markets stabilize. However, cybersecurity experts and some government officials expressed frustration with Colonial's limited sharing of technical information that could have helped other potential targets defend themselves from similar attacks. Even after the pipeline restarted, the effects lingered throughout the supply chain. It takes approximately 14 days for gasoline to travel the full length of the pipeline, meaning some areas continued experiencing shortages weeks after the operations resumed. Gas stations in Washington, D.C., Georgia, and the Carolinas were still reporting outages into late May. Beyond the immediate fuel shortages, the attack created lasting psychological effects among consumers and markets. Gasoline prices, which had spiked during the crisis, remained elevated throughout the summer of 2021. The incident demonstrated how a single cyber disruption could create physical supply shortages that persisted long after the technical problem was resolved. Chapter 8: The Investigation and Response. As Colonial worked to restore operations, a massive investigation unfolded across multiple federal agencies. The FBI took the lead, working with intelligence agencies, cryptocurrency analysis experts, and international partners to track DarkSide's operations. President Biden announced on May 13th that the US would pursue the attackers. We have been in direct communication with Moscow about the imperative for responsible countries to take decisive action against these ransomware networks. The pressure on DarkSide intensified rapidly after the Colonial attack brought unprecedented attention to their operations. On May 13th, DarkSide posted a cryptic message on their dark website claiming that some of their infrastructure had been seized and that they were ceasing operations. The group transferred their remaining cryptocurrency, approximately $4 million, to unknown wallets and seemingly disappeared. In a remarkable turn of events, on June 7, 2021, the Department of Justice announced that it had recovered 63.7 bitcoins, approximately $2.3 million, of Colonial's ransom payment. While this represented only about half of the original payment due to Bitcoin's fluctuating value, it had marked a significant achievement in the fight against ransomware. The FBI had obtained the private key for one of DarkSide's cryptocurrency wallets, allowing them to seize the funds directly. The recovery, while partial, sent a powerful message to ransomware groups. Cryptocurrency payments were not as untraceable as many believed. The technical details of how the FBI obtained the wallet's private key remain classified, but the operation demonstrated the new capabilities in tracking and recovering crypto ransoms. The Colonial Pipeline attack triggered the most significant cybersecurity policy changes for critical infrastructure in U.S. history. On May 12th, President Biden signed Executive Order 14028, implementing sweeping cybersecurity improvements for federal networks and establishing new requirements for software sold to the government. More directly relevant to pipeline security, the Transportation Security Administration issued emergency directives requiring pipeline operators to report cybersecurity incidents, designate cybersecurity coordinators, and review their current practices. For the first time, these security measures were mandatory rather than voluntary guidelines. The Colonial attack had accomplished in days what security advocates have been urging for years, transforming pipeline cybersecurity from a recommendation to a requirement. Chapter 9: Lessons and Legacy. The Colonial Pipeline attack exemplified multiple security failures that continue to plague critical infrastructure. The initial breach in an unused VPN account highlighted fundamental issues in account management and authentication. The lack of multi-factor authentication, a basic security control, allowed attackers to use a single compromised password to access critical systems. Perhaps the most concerning was the revelation that Colonial didn't have a comprehensive incident response plan for a cyber attack of this magnitude. The decision to shut down the entire pipeline stemmed partly from uncertainty about which systems were affected and how deeply the attackers had penetrated their networks. This lack of visibility and prepared response protocols turned what might have been a contained IT incident into a national crisis. Beyond Colonial specifically, the attack exposed the sophisticated ecosystem that enables modern ransomware operations. The ransomware as a service model utilized by DarkSide allows for specialization and scale that makes these attacks more dangerous and profitable. Cryptocurrency payments, while not completely anonymous, provide enough obfuscation to make tracking difficult. Dark web forums provide places for these criminal groups to recruit, collaborate, and sell access to compromised networks. The Colonial Pipeline attack represents a watershed moment in cybersecurity history. The point when digital threats to critical infrastructure became tangible for average Americans. When cybersecurity failures transform from abstract corporate problems to empty gas tanks and rising prices, public perception and policy priorities shift dramatically. The legacy of the Colonial Pipeline attack is the recognition that cybersecurity for critical infrastructure isn't just a technical issue, it's a matter of national security and economic stability. The attack forced a fundamental reassessment of how we protect the systems that underpin daily life and demonstrated that in our connected world, digital resilience is as essential as physical security. If you found this breakdown of the Colonial Pipeline attack informative, please like the video and subscribe for more in-depth analysis of major cyber incidents and their real-world impacts. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on how we should protect our critical infrastructure from future attacks, because this certainly won't be the last time attackers target the systems we all depend on.